In June 1943, as the Pacific War closed every conventional air corridor between Australia and the Allied powers, Qantas attempted the near impossible, a secret wartime route from Perth to what is now Sri Lanka, flown by unarmed Catalina flying boats, traversing nearly 5,700 kilometers of open Indian Ocean with zero diversion options. Pilots called it the double sunrise because the journey was so brutally long that the sun rose twice before they landed. At the time, it pushed Qantas to its absolute maximum limits. The aircraft was stripped of all non-essential weight. Fuel calculations left margins so thin that a single navigation error meant death in the ocean. Radio silence was mandatory. Passengers received a certificate simply for surviving the crossing. The service lasted just over 2 years before the war's end made it unnecessary. For 8 decades since, Australian aviation has accepted a painful truth. The continent sits too far away from basically everywhere. Sydney to London requires a stopover. Sydney to New York requires a stopover. Geography always wins. In late 2026, Qantas expects delivery of the first custom-modified Airbus A350-1000 ULR, configured specifically for ultra-long-haul operations from Sydney to London and New York JFK, non-stop. Approximately 20 hours in the air, commercial service is planned for the first half of 2027. But here's what makes no sense. Qantas is only ordering 12 of these aircraft. 12 planes won't threaten Emirates' stranglehold on Dubai connections. 12 planes won't dent Singapore Airlines' dominance through Changi. 12 planes can't realistically support more than 3 or 4 daily city pairs with limited operational resilience. Yet, every major Gulf carrier and Asian hub airline is watching Project Sunrise with concern. Empires built by hundreds of aircraft now must account for a dozen. So, how can 12 planes threaten networks that took decades and billions of dollars to construct? To understand why Qantas is betting its future on 12 aircraft, we need to understand why this route was considered impossible for so long. Sydney sits nearly 17,000 kilometers from London. New York is approximately 16,000 kilometers away. For decades, reaching either destination from Australia's east coast meant stopping at least once, often twice. Think Singapore, Dubai, Los Angeles, Hong Kong, or Doha. The physics were unforgiving. Aircraft that could carry enough fuel to fly non-stop couldn't carry enough passengers to make the route profitable. Aircraft that could carry enough passengers couldn't carry enough fuel. The trade-off seemed permanent. Airlines adapted by building hub-and-spoke networks. Emirates funneled Australian traffic through Dubai. Singapore Airlines captured it through Changi. Cathay Pacific routed it through Hong Kong. Qatar Airways pulled it through Doha. These carriers turned their hub's geography into an enormous competitive advantage. They captured passengers who had no choice but to stop somewhere. For Qantas, this created an existential problem. The Australia to London market alone represents hundreds of thousands of passengers annually. The Australia to New York market adds hundreds of thousands more. Yet, Qantas was surrendering significant portions of this premium traffic to competitors who controlled the convenient middle ground. The original Kangaroo route, inaugurated in 1947 with a Lockheed Constellation, required 55 hours of flying, spread across 5 days, with 6 intermediate stops. The Boeing 707 shrank it. The 747 shrank it further. But the fundamental constraint remained. No commercial aircraft could carry a viable passenger load non-stop from the Australian East Coast to Europe. That limitation persisted for over 70 years. Then, in March 2018, Qantas attempted a partial answer. They launched non-stop service from Perth to London using the Boeing 787-9 Dreamliner. The flight covered 14,500 kilometers in approximately 17 hours. The results exceeded expectations. Passengers demonstrated something the industry had long questioned. They would pay a meaningful premium to eliminate the stopover entirely. Qantas reported a yield uplift on the route compared to conventional one-stop services. But the thing is, Perth sits on Australia's west coast. Sydney and Melbourne sit on the east coast. These two cities hold the vast majority of Australia's population and premium travel demand. They remained roughly 2,500 kilometers too far from London for any existing aircraft to reach non-stop with a commercially viable passenger load. Perth proved the concept. It proved passengers would pay more. It proved the demand existed. But Perth is not where the money is. Qantas needed something else. They needed something purpose-built, something that didn't exist yet. And they needed it launched from the East Coast, from Sydney, from Melbourne, from the population centres where the actual corporate and premium leisure travel originates. Then, Qantas selected the Airbus A350-1000 as the preferred aircraft for Project Sunrise. But not the standard version. Standard wouldn't come close. What Airbus agreed to create represents one of the most extensively customized commercial aircraft programs in modern aviation. A standard A350-1000 carries between 375 and 400 passengers in typical airline configurations. The Qantas Project Sunrise variant will carry just 238. That's 93 fewer seats than British Airways puts in its A350-1000s. This isn't a minor adjustment. Qantas is sacrificing nearly 1/3 of potential revenue passengers on every single flight. Why accept such a dramatic reduction? Well, it comes down to weight. You see, every passenger requires a seat. Of course, every seat adds mass. Every bag adds mass. Every kilogram of mass requires fuel to carry it nearly 17,000 kilometers in one go. By reducing passenger count, Qantas reduces weight. By reducing weight, it extends range. By extending range, it makes Sydney to London possible. But the modifications extend far beyond seating, because that's pretty obvious. Airbus engineers integrated an additional fuel tank into the wing box, boosting total fuel capacity. The maximum takeoff weight was increased. The twin Rolls-Royce Trent XWB-97 engines were optimized for missions exceeding 20 hours of continuous flight. European regulators at EASA examined the fuel system architecture and mandated a redesign of the center fuel tank before certification. The work proved extensive enough that certification wasn't completed until mid-2024, contributing significantly to the program's delay. Early planning had targeted 2022 or 2023. Then it slipped to 2025. Now the first delivery is expected in the second half of 2026, with commercial service anticipated in the first half of 2027. The first Project Sunrise aircraft, currently registered under its test designation FWZNK, exited final assembly in Toulouse in April 2026 and has received its engines and major structural components. It's now undergoing ground and flight testing. The A350-1000 ULR has effectively become a bespoke variant purpose-built for Qantas, purpose-built for Project Sunrise, and there is a critical reason Qantas chose the larger A350-1000 over Singapore Airlines' existing A350-900 ULR. The Sydney to London route is approximately 900 nautical miles further than Singapore to New York. On the smaller airframe, the fuel required for that extra distance would reduce passenger capacity to commercially disastrous levels. Singapore Airlines can welcome only 161 all-business class passengers on its A350-900 ULR. Qantas needed 238 to make the economics work. But before committing hundreds of millions to Project Sunrise itself, Qantas conducted something no airline had attempted before: scientific research flights to study human performance on ultra-long-haul journeys. In late 2019, using Boeing 787-9 aircraft carrying only about 40 passengers each to achieve the necessary range, Qantas operated test flights from New York to Sydney and London to Sydney. Each exceeded 19 hours. The cabins were filled with sleep scientists from the University of Sydney, fatigue specialists, and volunteer passengers fitted with wearable trackers monitoring sleep patterns, physical movement, and heart rates. The pilots wore electroencephalogram brainwave monitors to track alertness. Their urine was collected throughout the flight to measure melatonin levels. This was not only a marketing exercise, it was also a clinical study. The findings challenged conventional assumptions. Traditional airline thinking assumed longer flights simply meant more discomfort on a linear scale. but the research revealed something counterintuitive. Arrival time matters more than total flight duration. Passengers who landed early in the morning local time reported less severe jet lag than those arriving at awkward hours, regardless of how long they'd been airborne. Light exposure also emerged as completely critical. Controlled cabin lighting calibrated to the destination time zone measurably reduced circadian disruption. Meal timing proved equally important. Feeding passengers according to destination schedules rather than departure schedules accelerated body clock adjustment. These were not theoretical findings, they were measurable outcomes, backed by biometric data from real human subjects on real ultra-long-haul flights. The findings directly shaped every element of the cabin design. The Project Sunrise aircraft will feature a dedicated well-being zone positioned between premium economy and economy, enclosed by real glass doors. The cabin's LED lighting system runs through 12 unique scenes designed by Australian industrial designer David Kayan, simulating slow-moving clouds during waking phases and moonlit water reflections during rest periods. Meals incorporate specific ingredients, chili to simulate wakefulness, and carbohydrate-heavy comfort food to induce sleep, timed meticulously to the destination clock. First-class passengers get 6 enclosed private suites, each featuring a separate lounge chair and a permanent 2-meter flat bed. Business offers 52 suites with sliding privacy doors. Premium economy provides 40 seats with extended leg support. Even economy gets 33 inches of pitch, more than industry standard. Every seat across all 4 classes gets free Viasat Wi-Fi and a 4K entertainment screen. The research flights demonstrated something the industry had questioned for decades. Passengers will tolerate ultra-long-haul flights, but only if the experience is designed around the human body rather than aircraft utilization. The significance of Project Sunrise isn't about passenger comfort, and it isn't really about Qantas flying to London. It's about what 12 aircraft can do to an entire industry's assumptions about how distance works. Consider the mathematics of ultra-long-haul operations. A Project Sunrise rotation consumes approximately 48 hours per aircraft. Depart Sydney in the evening, arrive at London Heathrow early morning. Crew rest, servicing, refueling, depart London the following evening. Arrive in Sydney the morning after that, or maybe even 2 mornings after that, depending on how you look at it. But effectively, 2 calendar days for a single round trip. Each daily Sydney to London service requires roughly 3 aircraft. Add Sydney to New York, perhaps Melbourne to London as a future option. 12 aircraft can realistically support 3 to 4 daily city pairs with limited operational resilience for maintenance or disruptions. By contrast, a Boeing 787 flying from Sydney to Singapore can complete the round trip in less than 10 hours. The same 12 aircraft could carry far more passengers to far more destinations on shorter routes. This seems irrational. Airlines typically optimize for utilization. More flights means more revenue. But Project Sunrise logic is strategic rather than operational. You see, Project Sunrise doesn't attempt to replace hub-and-spoke flying. Emirates will continue to carry millions of passengers to Australia via Dubai. Singapore Airlines will still dominate Changi connections. These carriers serve passengers who want to pay the lowest fares and not just sit in economy. I'm talking business and first class as well. Passengers who don't mind stopping. Basically, the vast majority of the middle market. What Project Sunrise does is create a new ultra-premium layer above existing options. For travelers willing to pay more to eliminate the stopover entirely, Qantas operates something no competitor can match from the Australian East Coast. A single departure, a single arrival, no connections, and no intermediate airports. The scarcity is deliberate. Limited seats on limited flights create value through exclusivity. The passenger paying for Project Sunrise isn't just paying for transport, they're paying for time. They're paying to bypass the entire hub-and-spoke system that everyone else must navigate. The premium isn't a gamble, it's modeled on the proven economics of the Perth-London route, scaled to the population centers that actually generate demand. The Project Sunrise fleet sits atop a carefully designed architecture. Alongside the 12 A350-1000 ULRs, Qantas is simultaneously investing in new aircraft for medium and long-haul operations, including the A321XLR. The Project Sunrise aircraft will not generate the majority of Qantas's revenue. They establish the brand position that supports everything else. When Qantas markets itself as the airline that flies from Australia to the world non-stop, that message elevates the entire operation. The ultra-long-haul fleet functions as a halo. Most airlines cannot replicate Project Sunrise immediately. The custom-modified aircraft don't exist in standard production. Ordering similar modifications would require years of negotiation with Airbus or even Boeing, years of certification, and years of waiting for delivery slots. Crew fatigue regulations present another barrier. Ultra-long-haul requires entirely new duty rules, new rostering systems, and new crew rest modules integrated into the aircraft. Qantas spent years negotiating with regulators and unions to establish the unprecedented duty frameworks required. Airlines without existing experience in this domain face steep learning curves and potentially hostile union negotiations. Network geometry doesn't support ultra-long-haul from most locations. Emirates can't fly Dubai to Sydney non-stop and call it an improvement. The whole point of Dubai is its convenient positioning between continents. The non-stop value proposition works best from isolated geographies like Australia, where the stopover adds genuine pain rather than mild inconvenience. Even the first A350-1000 ULR won't go straight into 20-hour service. Qantas plans to deploy it initially on shorter routes, allowing crews to acclimate to the new airframe before attempting the marathon missions. That phased approach itself represents institutional knowledge that competitors would need to build from scratch. Yet, every airline must now account for what Qantas is demonstrating. Stopover hubs are suddenly vulnerable to bypass when technology permits. The assumption that distance requires connection is no longer absolute. Gulf carriers built empires on convenient geography. That geography becomes less convenient when an aircraft can skip it entirely. As range extends and fuel efficiency improves further, more city pairs become viable for non-stop service. The routes that require Dubai today might not require Dubai tomorrow. Singapore Airlines was the first to recognize this shift. It already operates ultra-long-haul between Singapore and New York JFK and Newark using the A350-900 ULR. The race to develop next-generation capability is accelerating precisely because airlines recognize the competitive implications of what Qantas is proving. 12 aircraft don't scale volume, they scale influence. Project Sunrise doesn't replace the hub-and-spoke model. Emirates will definitely not disappear. Singapore Airlines isn't going to collapse. Qatar Airways will continue flying widebodies through Doha. The great connecting hubs will continue serving the majority of travelers. But Project Sunrise creates something new, a demonstration that for certain passengers on certain routes, the elimination of the stopover itself carries value worth paying for. That time saving of up to 4 hours compared to one-stop alternatives isn't just convenience, it's a product category that didn't previously exist from the Australian East Coast. The industry's response will be telling. Analysts anticipate that Gulf and Asian hub carriers may respond by heavily discounting one-stop fares to undercut the non-stop premium. Others may accelerate their own ultra-long-haul programs. Either way, the competitive equilibrium that held for decades, the assumption that Australia was simply too far away to reach directly, has been permanently disrupted. When those passengers board the inaugural flight from Sydney to London in 2027, they'll complete a journey that took over 80 years to make possible. 12 planes, a handful of routes, limited frequencies, and proof that sometimes the most significant changes in aviation don't require hundreds of aircraft. Sometimes they require conviction, custom engineering, fatigue science that no airline had previously attempted, and the willingness to bet that how people experience distance matters as much as the distance itself. The question isn't whether 12 aircraft can change the world, it's whether the rest of the industry is really paying attention. Hey, before you go, the YouTube algorithm thinks you're going to like this video next, so why not check it out?